Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about multi-cloud computing and the role that Service Mesh plays in enabling multi-cloud. Turns out Service Mesh plays a pretty big role. To discuss that, I'm joined by Brian Gracely, Head of Marketing at Solo. Brian, your reputation precedes you, sir.
Thank you, James. I appreciate it. Good to be with you today.
So multi-cloud computing, a lot going on in the market. Multi-cloud has evolved so much from its simpler origins back in 2012 or so. Companies now have 3 or 4 clouds, native cloud, legacy cloud. They're not even sure what they have sometimes.
Right.
As you survey the multi-cloud market, what do you see driving the market this year?
Yeah, I see a couple of things. I mean, there's some post-COVID kind of realities we're dealing with, which is, we're dealing with a little bit softer economy, so people are more conscious about spend. They're trying to be optimized. I think the big thing is the reality is, multi-cloud has been around for a while. There were some factions in the industry that sort of wanted to say, nope, it won't happen. You'll pick a cloud, you'll standardize, you'll go from there. And the reality is,
pardon the interruption. Was one of those factions like a large vendor who thought that it could handle the entire market? Where was that voice coming from?
Yeah, well, I think it was coming from a few places, but yeah, it was the public cloud vendor saying, "Look, I have all the services. Why wouldn't you come here?"
Right.
And the reality we're seeing is a couple of things. One, even if somebody offers all of the services, they're not always necessarily everybody's favorite. Right, not a knock on them, but
right.
Competition is good.
Right.
I think we've seen sort of a fragmentation or an explosion of IT. So you don't have central IT making all the decisions. So groups do things. You have acquisitions. You have different things happen. So multi-cloud's become a reality, whether people intended it that way or not. And now they're trying to figure out, especially since the economy's different, money's not as cheap as it used to be, how do I now manage this thing effectively? How do I get my arms around it? Because the genie's out of the bottle. And the other thing is I think we're seeing a revitalization of some of the private cloud stuff as well, right? We've seen the cloud providers announce their earning numbers. They're still growing, but they're slowing. And I think that says, not every application is going to be relevant to the cloud, whether that's because of location, like in Europe, we just got back from KubeCon, big conversations in Europe about, well, can you keep my services in France? Can you keep them in Germany? Can you keep them wherever? So,
right.
All those things mixed together is kind of what multi-cloud is what we're dealing with these days.
On that slowing growth issue, one of the things I've heard about this year that I find kind of surprising is a little bit more about the idea of repatriation. Like literally, companies in some instances are moving workloads back from the cloud to the in-house data center, which I never thought back in cloud's early days that would happen. I thought, well, cloud is going to kill the data center and that's all there is. But no, turns out the data center is very much alive. In fact, sometimes workloads are migrating from the cloud to the data center. Who could have guessed that?
Yeah, I don't know that I don't see as much of that. I think there is some out there, but I think we're also seeing people be smarter with spend, right? We're seeing this big push these days around cloud cost management, around open source projects that support that, vendors that make it easier to do that. So I think a couple of those things together, we're seeing technologies like ARM that reduce your cost spend by 30, 40, 50%. So there's a lot of efficiency that is what to be expected after big boom periods.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about Service Mesh.
Sure.
Explain what Service Mesh is to us. Give us the short 101, if you would, but then also how does it help multi-cloud?
Yeah. So simplest way to think about it, Service Mesh is a network abstraction. It's a way of saying instead of having to have all sorts of network awareness and security awareness built into my applications, I can build those into the network. It's less work for developers to worry about. Centralizes things for engineering teams, platform engineering teams, and allows them to build these more agile applications. We call them cloud native applications, things that change more frequently. Their identity isn't always known. So Service Mesh sort of steps in there and says, I will make sure you've got robust networking, robust security, and then a place where when you have to do observability or monitoring or troubleshooting, that you can grab that out of the network.
So it's a network abstraction, but what does that network encompass? Is it a company's entire multi-cloud deployment? Is it in-house? How does that work?
Yeah, it's originally I think the scope for Service Mesh was typically Kubernetes clusters. So Service Mesh kind of came alive right after Kubernetes did. but it's expanded. So it's moved from just containers to we're now seeing it relevant in VM and virtualization workloads. So that, it's a huge thing. And then we're also starting to see areas start to dabble around serverless as well. So it's become this abstraction that can go across the three kind of main compute types we see, containers, VMs, and serverless.
Would one company that's using service mesh have one network abstraction that would be speaking to its AWS deployment and its Azure deployment and its GCP deployment?
Yeah, that's sort of the thing we're starting to see, and we saw that really come up this last couple of weeks at KubeCon. So we're starting to see my company, a few other companies are starting to broaden the scope from sort of one cloud, one environment to the domain of being able to cross multiple clouds. So yeah, the nice thing about the cloud providers, unlike what we do on-prem, is they've got such great, robust APIs that we can easily plug into. And all of us in the cloud native world have been able to go, oh, I can plug into the VPC API, I can plug into the DNS API. And so actually extending things into the cloud is proving to be easier than it was on-prem, where you kind of get a mix and match of lots of weird technologies.
Well, give me sort of a portrait of what the world looks like without service mesh, and then what it looks like with service mesh, say on a daily basis. How would the workflow go?
Yeah, sure. So, the simplest way to think of it is if I take, an existing application that we used to call a monolith, and we split that up as a microservice. So let's say it's got 5 or 6 pieces now. Well, the first thing that happens is those 5 pieces have to go across the network to talk to each other, right? They're logically an application, but they have to go across the network.
And
so
one question, if I may, that those 5 pieces could be on different clouds, correct?
They could be anywhere, right?
Which strikes me, the complexity of that, one huge piece of software being broken up into modular microservices hosted on different clouds. To me, that's an explosion of complexity there. But please, let's not.
Well, it is. It's everything in our world. There's never sort of zero sum, right? So the complexity gets pushed to the infrastructure teams, the security teams, but for the application teams, they say, well, I don't have to deal with this gigantic thing anymore. I deal with my piece, and I can upgrade that one piece, or I can make a change to a piece. So it is a shifting of where's the priorities and where do we want to put the burden on groups. But yeah, to kind of continue, once those things are distributed, a lot of things have to happen. I have to be able to find where they are, who can talk to who, are there rules about which direction we can talk to each other. So maybe a front end can talk to a database, but a database isn't supposed to talk to random things. I have to be able to identify them, so I need a cryptographic identity that I can validate that you're who you are and I'm who I am. And so there's just a lot of things that used to be built into application logic that we now have a decision to say, should I put that in the network? Because if I add 10 more pieces to that application, do I want those 10 groups to have to keep track of all that? So it's, we get this idea of like, let me centralize some of those functions into the service mesh and not have to burden the application teams. Because the point of microservices is, let the application teams be agile, let them go fast, let them make changes. And if we can take some of that, low-lying, underlying stuff, put it in the network, simplifies life for them.
So it's a network abstraction. I assume that there's going to be virtualization vendors out there who go, yeah, we handle that. I mean, that's part of our larger virtualization network. Sure, we do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a robust market. I mean, there's probably at least a dozen or so companies that provide it. There's actually still 3 or 4 kind of competing standards about the best way to do it. So it's an area that has a lot of interest. Networking and security are huge markets in and of themselves. And so, yeah, there's people coming at it from a VM angle, a container angle, a Kubernetes angle. Yeah, there's a lot of different approaches to it out there.
Well, a perfect moment to drill down to Solo's product offering. I mean, what is the Solo take on service mesh, and how is it addressing the needs of its clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So our approach is primarily around what we think is the leading standard for service mesh, which is called Istio. Istio originally was a project that was created by Google. It's now part of the CNCF, so it's very much followed Kubernetes path. Solo has become really kind of the second leading voice in Istio. So we're one of the largest contributors to that project. The creator of the project, Louis Ryan, is our CTO. So we very much believe in a very robust service mesh, one that is very aligned to Kubernetes, and then one that's flexible. And what we've really been focused on in this space is, and we came out with something last fall that's evolved, is service mesh originally was fairly complicated, right? When we're abstracting things tend to get a little bit complicated. We've built a much simpler version of service mesh called ambient mesh, still part of the Istio family, still part of the Istio project. So we kind of get the best of Google DNA plus what Solo and Google have done to really simplify it for people to make it easier to deploy, easier to troubleshoot. So we've been very focused on trying to make service mesh easier, and then extending it to support VMs and support serverless and do multi-cloud and so forth. So we've been, simplification first, multi-cloud second.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's one of those other mega trends, the need for simplification among many companies. Like give us a tool, but make it as simple as you can.
Right.
The Istio, I assume, is an acronym. What is Istio specifically?
Well, Istio is actually it's actually not an acronym. It's just the name of the project.
Okay.
All of the projects, or a number of the projects around Kubernetes, have this sort of nautical theme to it. So Istio is sort of like a Greek sailboat.
Okay.
Yeah, so it goes back to that. If you see the logo of the project, it's a sailboat. So it just kind of fits in this nautical theme that's around Kubernetes and the Kubernetes ecosystem.
Right. So the service mesh, I mean, I'm going to assume that the IT admins, the IT managers are going to go, hey, I'm so happy it's coming on board, it makes my life easier.
Yep.
Or it's like, oh no, a new thing to learn. What is your take on like how it interoperates with existing systems?
Yeah, I think, our target customer, our target user is very much what people now call like platform engineering. So we've seen this evolution from traditional infrastructure, and then they sort of became cloud engineers because they had to figure out the world's moving a little faster.
Right.
And now, their real role is they still own infrastructure, they still own security, but they also want to make it easier for developers to onboard applications. And so you often hear them, refer to themselves as DevOps or platform engineering. We really kind of fit in there. At the end of the day, our technology is still networking and security. So if you're a networking and security professional, this is really just sort of an incremental evolution, just like you've been doing over your career for the last 10 years or 20 years. So it's not like having to learn, Mandarin Chinese if you've only spoken English your whole life. It's really kind of very incremental.
An extension. And
Exactly.
I think the idea of platform engineering is technology that is rapidly headed towards the mainstream.
Yep.
Can you give us kind of the brief nutshell? What is platform engineering?
Yeah. So platform engineering, their job is sort of twofold. Number one, it's I want to build infrastructure that again can run anywhere. It could be in the cloud, it could be private, it could be public. And I want to be able to do two things. Number one, I want to make it easy for developers to onboard their application. So instead of the idea of you give me a new release every 18 months, I have to be prepared to deal with you giving me a new release every 18 minutes or every 18 days or whatever. So it's just infrastructure that can deal with rapid change. And then the second piece is, building infrastructure that can take advantage of the cloud. So I can scale up when I need to. I can scale down. That used to be a very manual process. I had to go unplug cables and I had to go rack and stack things. Now if I want 20 new servers, it's just an API call. If I want more, more security, it's an API call. So it's managing that scalable infrastructure and then making it really easy for developers to onboard applications as fast as they need to.
Right. Definitely an idea whose time has come, no question about it.
Absolutely.
Let's look to the future. I think companies always want to look to the future because they want to be able to get prepared now to the extent they can. I mean, what do you see when you look in your crystal ball, the future of multi-cloud computing as it relates to service mesh technology, some milestones or some key developments you see?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, like I said, there's some new technologies out there, ambient being one of them as part of the Istio project. We're seeing a technology called Cilium. Cilium is a sort of an extension of Linux that allows us to do really powerful monitoring at the kernel level for Linux. So, I want to get deep into what's happening with packets, what's happening with latency and so forth. So we're seeing the coming together of this powerful service mesh technology with ambient that's simpler, this powerful sort of lower level networking technology with Cilium those two trends they're emerging over the last year or so, but they're going to have a huge runway for what the future of the next 3 or 4 years looks like. I think, if your listeners are out there, Istio Ambient plus Cilium is going to be a really powerful combination.
Can you talk at all about the cost structure, how it affects costs or cloud costs? What's the play there?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is all this technology it's fundamentally open source. So there's going to be a rich ecosystem with it. And it's all software. So it's really, really scalable. So whether you're running it locally or you're running it in the cloud, you can really scale it to very much align to how you use it. So we don't see these big sort of CapEx step functions where you got to buy 10 and then you got to buy 100. People very much align the cost to incremental usage. And I think what we see with it, and the reason it's so powerful is when I'm deploying these new applications and they're going faster and they're deployed anywhere, the number one thing that you're trying to avoid, because so many of these applications they're customer facing, they're big data facing, like they're very at risk of, like, if they go down, someone's going to notice. You're going to end up on Reddit. You're going to end up on Hacker News.
Right.
And so it's really important to say, look, I want to put the right tooling in place so that I've got visibility. I can troubleshoot. I can reroute around failures. So the cost of it is almost like insurance kind of cost, right? It's a small piece, but it ensures that you're not going to have failures. You're going to be able to scale so that when that right project succeeds, you can be successful. So it's a very, very incremental increase to overall IT spend.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of service mesh adoption, I mean, it's been around a while. I've heard about it.
Yep.
What do you think in terms of like how close it is to the mainstream, or what level, if you take a hazard to guess, what percentage of companies actually adopting service mesh?
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely been a technology that's been primarily incremental to Kubernetes. So, if we put a few things, sort of stack some things on, we're now seeing Kubernetes in maybe 40 or 50% of enterprises, right? That's taken 3 or 4 years to kind of stabilize and get in place. Service mesh has really been maybe a year or two behind that trend. So we're at the beginning of it becoming mainstream. We're seeing, say, 25% of the market has started to adopt it in one way or the other. But it's what I sort of call, it's a cloud native 2.0 technology. Cloud native 1.0, lots of containers, lots of Kubernetes, figure that out. And now the next challenges are, how do I scale it? How do I secure it? How do I do it across multi-cloud? So we're right at the beginning of that cloud 2.0 trend, I think. But yeah, it's right, it's starting to ramp up.
Cool stuff, Brian. I think you said it. I learned a bunch. Thanks for sharing your expertise today, and please come back and talk with us again sometime.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on. Great talking to you.